So welcome back. Good choice. This is a natural successor panel to our first one on AI adoption and work design. And I'm delighted to be chairing this fantastic panel. I'll ask everybody to introduce themselves and say a few words about why they're particularly interested in good work design. And then we will, as fast as we can, throw it open. And I will move over here so I can see the questions as they pop up on the screen behind me. Graeme, you first.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for, as you say, making the right choice, I hope. So I rather confusingly have two job titles up here, I think. So I was working with Nationwide until a couple of weeks ago. And while I was with Nationwide, I spent the last 3.5, nearly 4 years working on building out our AI strategy, developing our AI council, all our AI governance, tracking 135 use cases through the organization and participating in this amazing research that Anna and her team did over the last year or so. And then I've left Nationwide to go and develop and run a community in Bristol in the West called AI West to promote responsible AI across sectors, and to try and take some of the learning from this research and other bits of research to work between universities and the government and industry to try and create a kind of centre of best practice for AI in the UK. So that's I'm literally right in the middle of that journey right now. I will just say from a job design perspective, which is what this research has revealed, and it's something that I guess I'd suspected as we were developing these use cases over the last 3 years or 4 years or so, is that job design is an absolutely critical piece of AI implementation, and it's only going to become even more critical as organizations experiment with agentic AI. And one of the main reasons for that is because when you start putting AI into your organization, you're going to very quickly find that the humans will mess it up. and I think that in a nice way, but sometimes not in a nice way, there's also the opportunity to kind of sabotage it and tell you that it's not actually as good as you thought it was. And in some instances, it isn't as good as you think it is. So I will, I've got lots to say about it, but I will pass on to the rest of the panel.
Thank you. I will thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here. So my name's Clare McNeil. I'm Chief Executive of Timewise, and we work with employers and employees in the workplace to bridge the gaps between the two. And our mission is to create work that works for modern lives. And that's really because more of us have health conditions and disabilities that we manage alongside work in the workplace. We have caring responsibilities, and just more generally, more of us expect to have more of a say over how, when, and where we work. And we do this by working directly with employers on their culture, their strategy, and their values. And we do this primarily in low-wage sectors like retail, hospitality, social care, and health. And I think there are lots of lessons from work design, good job design in these sectors that we've worked on over decades actually to try and improve input and control for workers and fairness at work. Lots of lessons that can be applied when thinking about AI adoption and innovation. So we are not experts by any means on AI adoption and innovation, but really interested in what application there might be from some of the lessons that we and others have absorbed over the years.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Kat Drew. I'm the Chief Design Officer at the Design Council. We're the national champion for design, and we champion design in all of its ways, from UX design all the way through to the design of great infrastructure. And at the heart of what we do is really promote a people-centered approach to designing things, whether that is how AI products and services meet the needs of users, whether that's patients or rail users, all the way through to thinking about how employees adopt AI as well. And we think, as I think the conference has already said, it's not a tech issue alone, it's a people and culture issue. And so engagement is really crucial to it. And it also creates loads more innovation.
Thank you so much. So that takes us back to where we left perhaps the first panel, which is that AI is changing the tasks that we do, who does them, the skills that we both need and that we're applying and developing, and how our roles and responsibilities, our decision-making rights and so on are changing within that. And we need to think about how to configure it, design in a way that is designed deliberately for certain ends or to meet challenges. Inspired by what the Design Council do as well, it has made me remember and want to share that the process that we used, Graeme, for the case studies that have been published today, used a design and systems thinking approach in which the Design Council's classic 2-diamond model was extended a 3rd diamond to think about embedding that in the workplace, designing in the workplace around people, around, thinking about employees not just as users but as the centre of the whole thing, and how we were thinking about going through that process as the AI was implemented, which was its contribution. So I get the first question, and I've got some that have been written down for me, but if there's some that are coming up, I'm tempted to go straight for those. In its most simplistic terms, what are the stages in order that you advise we approach workplace design and transformation? That's a very specific question, but it's got a lot of support. Who wants to take that one? Graeme, you're jumping up.
So I'm going to sort of take it sort of back to basics based on one of the things that we learned at Nationwide. And for the first year and a half or so, we were ploughing lots of Gen AI use cases through because vendors were coming to us and telling us the technology was going to be amazing. And then we got inundated with literally dozens, hundreds of new AI tools. So I think one of the first questions you have in your organizations, or if you're working in organizations, is actually, do we have the capability to manage this number of AI tools in a responsible way? And you probably won't have. You probably have quite a restricted amount of resource, limited skilled resource to be able to do that. So the first question we then put back into our process was, how will this actually meet our purpose? Because what we were finding was that we were literally being inundated with new AI software and new AI tools, etc., that might have done a really great job, but actually didn't really help us meet our purpose. So when people come and talk to me about the most important thing that they can do when they're looking at workplace design and transformation is, does your AI tool actually, is it going to help deliver your purpose? Which seems like such a simple thing to say, but it basically got rid of about 50-60% of the stuff that was coming through our kind of pipeline. And that's a really important thing to have, because once you get into implementation, you're very quickly going to have to explain to your employees what this tool is going to do and how it will help deliver your purpose. And if you can't explain that, you've lost everybody. You've lost everyone already before you've even got there. So I'd say it's a really devastatingly simple thing to do, but it really, really helped us move that forward. And then I think kind of the next steps that we did was that we went it further by kind of making sure that every single use case went through a series of principles that we had given. We made sure that each use case fulfilled each of those principles, and then we tracked the use case through use case development before we felt safe to put it out into our organization. But that does not mean to say that that is going to be a successful use case, and I think kind of the case study that we explored in with the IFOW here, what really revealed that, like, we made some big mistakes, and we've learned a lot from it. And I don't know whether to touch on that now or whether to come back to it later. I feel like I'll pass on to the rest of the panel.
I saw that Kat wanted to say something, and I was hoping, in fact, that given the question was about stages, you may wish to share your Design Council perspective.
Yeah, and I think really picking up on your first point that you were making about kind of starting with why, purpose and needs rather than tech first is really important. So I was just going to share for people in the room who haven't maybe heard of the Double Diamond, what that kind of process of engagement and experimentation is. Essentially, if you can imagine two diamonds, they kind of go out and then they go in again. And it's a process of divergent and then convergent thinking. So rather than jumping straight to a solution, a tech solution, which we're being offered all the time, the first diamond is a space for you to, with many different people, with your colleagues, with your staff, to understand why you're doing the thing you're doing. So what's the problem we're trying to solve? What's the purpose? Really engaging people in that, and then exploring together what, how you might then go about using the AI technology, which serves the purpose both of training people in its use, but also getting people to iterate and experiment, think about what are the other things that might need to change around it, what needs to happen to their roles, etc. So you've really got that kind of buy-in and training all the way through before then you roll it out. So that is what I would say, but I would also say, you know, it's for people to take and adopt for your organisations.
Fantastic. So to bring Clare in and combine it perhaps with the second question about CV creation and HR CV sifting, what can we learn from what Timewise has done and the more flexible working practices that you have forefronted about recruitment and the potential to ensure that good talent is not recognised or sifted out without feedback or at all.
Okay, I think I'll just draw out three sort of general lessons from our work, first of all, and actually overlaps a lot with points that have just been made. I think the first point I would make is on good work design is that it is about redesign, it's not about retrofitting. And I think the temptation when any new technology comes along for employers is to think, how can we do what we do more efficiently, more cheaply, more quickly, when actually we want to be asking these first principles questions, which are, what is this role intended to deliver? And how does that mean that it needs to be redesigned? And in starting very much with the worker and tracking back to the technology rather than the other way round, that is definitely a lesson from all of our work and will result in much more transformational approaches, I think. The second lesson would be around the importance of consulting with workers. Again, it may sound obvious, but we can often underestimate the practical insights that workers will have into their own roles and overestimate the insights that senior managers might have. And so when it comes to AI adoption, I think really important to be speaking to workers about which tasks do they think that can be best replaced or augmented by the use of tools. And then the final one, and this probably comes back to the HR point, is around the quality and the importance of line management. We have all seen how the best intentions at a senior management, senior leadership level get filtered through line management quality, and so equipping line managers with the tools to understand AI innovation adoption, to have honest and confident discussions with their workforce is really crucial, I think. And just coming back to the consultation, all of the best insights that we've had in our redesign work, whether it's been in retail, looking at progression routes for store managers, whether it has been in social care, looking at how we can decentralize decision making, a lot of the best insights and ideas have come from focus groups, consultations with workers. So those are three sort of broad lessons that I would pull out.
So it seems in that way as if work design is also a very handy bridge from thinking about recruitment and the numbers of jobs and matching from that point of view to what's actually happening inside jobs, how those changes are and how they can be reconfigured in a better way. The next question, do you think that AI will ultimately reduce cognitive load and create more space for focus and recovery from work? Or are we at risk of creating an always-on amplification layer that further depletes people? what role
Yeah,
does work design
I think there was a
play?
piece of research published last week by Stanford on AI brain fry, which, if you get the chance to read, is kind of insight into the fact that now I think employees are feeling that not only do they have to be accountable and deliver their own work, they suddenly are inheriting an AI system or systems that they have to monitor and make sure aren't doing bad things on their behalf as well, but they also have accountability for. So I think there is a real issue there in trying to understand how we define clearly around accountability for people as part of their job roles when they're using AI, and that if it just adds to their load, that is going to be a real challenge for sure. I think that has the question disappeared? They're scrolling through. I do worry. I think that one of the main challenges, just when we look at the research that we did with Anna, one of the challenges was that we found that the engineering community, so it was 800 software engineering users who had adopted an IT codex tool, and was actually the kind of mental load of the fact that it might replace them. That really, and you have to find a way to create enough organizational sort of safety and to be able to kind of deploy the technology in a way that they feel they can talk honestly to you about, which they managed to do with Anna and her team, which is why I'd encourage people to participate in this kind of research, because they wouldn't necessarily have told us, and we have a pretty open culture nationwide. And I think that, like, at the point when we went through the use case development over a year ago, and launched it, since that point, all the software companies in America started slashing loads and loads and loads of jobs. And so the background of which any AI implementation is going to be overshadowed by what is going on in the broader context of the culture that we're operating in. There's multi-systems going on. So you sit down with people and you can tell them, oh no, honestly, we're not going to get rid of your job, but actually what they're reading the paper or they heard on the radio on the way into work or whatever will tell them something else. So I do not underestimate that fear of being obsolete, or FOBO as it's called, and what the weight of that is in any implementation. And I think that there is some real benefit in working with independents to actually uncover some of that. And bringing external people to burst that balloon, because otherwise I think people they'll kind of hide away their fears, or they'll report that it's not working or something, and I think you need to dig under the surface of that.
So it was encouraging people to really think closely about what they were doing with their time and how, in a more precise way, they were using and applying the AI, and what was working and what wasn't working.
And that was probably one of the most valuable things we got from the research, actually, was that people felt they could express this view that they, the 20 years of coding experience they had was about to be made obsolete by this codex tool. It's not something. It's a real human fear of, like, this expertise that they developed is about to be taken away from them somehow. So, like, being able to kind of sit down with them and really understand and encourage. And this is where we talked this morning about the importance of managerial skills and coaching skills. If you really need to develop that managers kind of coaching skills to be able to hold people in that state of kind of the lack of safety, I suppose, around it. And I hate to say it, but most IT managers aren't necessarily all that strong and emotionally intelligent, and they struggle with that, with holding those communities in that space. So, if you're working in an HR function, there's a real value add that you can think about there is actually, can we develop the coaching skills of people who are working with these populations, and whether you're delivering it in IT functions or wherever you're putting it in the business, that set of coaching skills to hold people in that space of lack of safety is actually really, really important now.
I just wanted to build on that and highlight a couple of examples where design has been used in that way. So I think kind of holding the space for those, to be able to surface some of those fears and anxieties, because without doing that, people won't be able to move on in whichever way. So this is a non-AI example, but about 10 years ago, TfL were trying to create efficiencies within their stations, and they removed a lot of the manned ticket offices. And this was obviously a big workforce issue, but they worked with an organisation called LiveWork to take a very much co-design approach to that. So rather than the researchers just going off and talking to passengers about how to improve their journeys, they actually got the staff themselves to be the researchers going out and understanding what the needs of were passengers, how things could be made more efficient. And even though that did end up in some unmanned stations, they also created some new roles within the stations for people to guide people with particular disabilities or needs to their onwards destination. So it was a job redesign, because it wasn't kind of automating or replacing entirely, but through that co-design process of what the need was, it created some more roles. There's an organisation at the moment called the Liminal Space, which has got a jobs design lab. They might even be working with you, which does provide this space, as you say, for those safe conversations.
And just to really briefly add to that, I'm sure the point was made this morning, but that's also where you're likely to see or to generate the productivity gains, to really derive the business value is through, working out what you do with that time that is then created and is effectively surplus.
Yeah, so it will help identify the opportunities for new value creation through participatory innovation, which is the very opposite of the efficiency trap, which takes us to the next question. Can we hear about some lessons learned from failure? I'm going to allow myself one leading question.
Okay, so Anna mentioned this thing called the AI efficiency trap, and I suspect those of you who are working in organisations might recognise this. So back to this use case with these 800 IT developers. We did the use case development, and we worked out that it will be 30 to 40% more productive if we gave them this tool. So we tested it on 40 or 50 people, and that was what the answer came back and said. We could get 30 to 40% productivity gains in being able to code more stuff. So that was the business case that was written for these 800 coders. And then what happened was that we decided that we would increase their workload to take that into account. Not a good idea, right? Because we thought, these guys are going to be 30 to 40% more efficient, and so we locked that into their objectives, and that was to kind of effectively prove that the return on investment was worth it, that it was worth us paying Microsoft X amount of hundreds of thousands of pounds to buy this software. So that put us in a difficult situation, because actually the adoption rate wasn't equal across 800 people, and the adoption rate between men and women differed, which is a really important lesson. That creates inequalities further down the line as well. And we'd gone to great lengths to recruit 250 IT developers and train 250 female IT developers into our team as well. And then suddenly what we found was that half our team were using these tools and half of them weren't. And those who were using it were more productive. And so what was that was just having an impact on who looked more productive and who wasn't. So you just really need to think about like these sort of these issues relating to kind of performance or kind of building and performance targets. The second thing was actually that the tool wasn't that great, basically. So Microsoft said it was amazing, and it turned out that it wasn't. And the training wasn't that great that they gave us either. So actually, when we pulled it out to 800 people, what we found was that they came back, and this is what they said in the research, was that it isn't that great. It's not 30 to 40% better, but now I've got all these massive targets to deliver against. And so what you're going to see in organizations, and this challenge around ROI and feedback, is that organizations not hitting their ROI is because they spent a lot of money on the software and they have to justify that it's delivered. And then what happens is they implement it, and then they find that it doesn't. And then everybody looks at the workers and go, well, you're not using it well enough, or you're not using it hard enough. But it could be a combination of factors. And so we found ourselves in this efficiency trap, what we would call the efficiency trap. And it was a mistake to put in change the targets, because that discouraged the experimentation phase. Kind of people were already I have to use it. I've been told I've got to use it, and their managers felt that they had to tell them to use it, and it just became like not what you need when it's one of your showcase AI sort of implementations in the organization. So I think we couldn't then point to it and say, look how amazing this is to everyone else in the organisation when it was one of the first kind of big rollouts that we had in the organisation. So I think it became a trap for us in that particular case study. And we did learn from that, and we learned from it and put it in. Didn't do that with our other changes, but the pressure is there, obviously, for IT directors and so on to justify the spend. Everybody wants to say, am I getting value for money for this AI or not? Right through from the board all the way down. So I think that's a real challenge for organisations.
So you've got these metrics, they're not quite right. You want to avoid being locked into them and it becoming, self-perpetuating without creating new value. How do you, at that point, Kat or Clare, advocate for human-centred good work design in ways that leaders and others will actually understand and respond to? How do you kick off the conversation?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think it is really fundamental. I mean, an example that comes to mind is work that we've done in the construction sector, where we've been working to improve flexibility in the workplace for many years now. We've had some success, even though it's a very difficult context to work in. And partly that success has come down to a stronger business case. So it's always really important to set out the business benefits. Those are absolutely key. And we do have some evidence of that in sectors like construction. But I think what we've seen is that while you can, we've introduced team-based approaches to rostering, for example, which mean that people can work early or late shifts, gives them a bit more control and input. Very simple things like challenging cultures of presenteeism. As simple as people going home on time sometimes it can be quite revolutionary. But you can hit a sort of a barrier. And unless, this comes back to the point about redesign, not retrofit, unless you are fundamentally changing the way in which work is designed. So in the construction sector, for example, excessive hours, burnout is just endemic because it's the way that too often work is designed. So we have high suicide rates. You have, people with higher than average problems when it comes to mental health, for example. So I think that's a sort of lesson that we can think about when it comes to AI adoption and innovation, which is that you have to really fundamentally think about how you're designing work and why. And in terms of that, the question about how do you start that conversation, very often in our experience, it does start at the top. You do have to start with leadership and values and culture. That really is key. And then all of the other lessons that I pointed to earlier around the importance of consulting workers, line management, in the steps that Kat set out. But it's not easy, and I think the hardest piece often is getting senior leadership engaged. And I think that's a probably different challenge actually when it comes to AI adoption and innovation, because it's, people are concerned about it and worried about it, but maybe not quite sure how to go about creating change.
Thank you. And Kat, one for you perhaps. So should this be done on a role-by-role basis, or a team-by-team basis, or an organisation or a systems or anything else basis?
I mean, I would start again at the kind of the organisational level, because it is that's the question. It's like, if you reframe the question, not how do we adopt more AI for efficiency, but how can we adopt AI to create value for all, for our shareholders, for our workers, for the people who use our products and services. That's the kind of the level that you need to be starting at. That's the reframed, how might we question? And to do that as a collective endeavour, I think it does start with leadership, but to point to where things have failed, or like costly tech hasn't been implemented because you haven't adopted, but definitely not on a role by role, because I think this is a collective inquiry, right? Starting with an understanding of what do we need to do as an organisation? How can the AI enhance that? What can it automate? What can it substitute? What are the things then we need to, how do we redesign our time around that, and to do so in a way that promotes health and well-being? Those are the series of questions that I would want an organisation to be taken through, and quite often it is having an external person to come in and to facilitate just allows people to have that more honest conversation. The other thing I'd say is there will be AI kind of experimentation and innovation happening all over organisations, and actually trying to celebrate some of that, so people don't see it just has to wait for the top-down kind of approach, but actually getting people to share what they're doing, share learnings, realising that kind of making mistakes is actually part of this. All of that kind of cultural shift towards like working and experimenting in the open, I think is really important.
Thank you. And now perhaps, could everybody give, in relative bullet point form, an example of good adoption? And in particular, in talking about it, were employees engaged from the outset of that, and how was that best done?
Good AI adoption. I don't know, there's not a lot of brilliant case studies out there, isn't there? That's interesting, we're all here talking about it. I think I'm going to use an example that I have talked about, that we've used that I used when I was in Nationwide. So one of the things that we were looking at doing was trying to improve efficiencies for our contact centres, and I think a lot of businesses were looking at contact centre improvement, and we're going to see a lot of AI come in as a replacement for people, voice and text and so on, those kind of things. We quickly worked out that we could deploy 4 different parts of AI to different parts of the contact center process that would, in principle, help that end-to-end process for a customer phoning to be recognized as potentially as being vulnerable, to flag that to the call handler, to give them some assistance in answering that call by using AI to pull out the right information, and then by wrapping up the call and flagging that call and putting it on the record so that when the customer calls back that we would know that they were vulnerable. So those are like 4 different parts of AI that I'm sure will all become one neat package in the next 6 months, sold to you by somebody. But what we realized in doing that was that we would save probably 45 seconds per call off the call, which is like to anyone who runs a contact center is like amazing. It's the most incredible cost benefit case. But actually what would happen is that we would end up pushing loads more calls at our contact center agents if we did that. So like the benefit for the people who've actually got to answer the call and speak to our customers starts to get eroded by deploying this technology, because you just kind of, you're like, oh, wait a minute, I'm already busy enough, but now you're going to push even more calls to me because you're saving 40 seconds, but you're giving me more calls. When actually what our customers want and what our colleagues want to do was spend more time talking to people who might be vulnerable. So we took a brave decision to not take that 40 seconds away from them and to give the 40 seconds back to the agent, and to try and find the savings somewhere else in the end-to-end process. Like now, that is a really rare exception in the industry, and it's probably done because of Nationwide's values and the approach that it takes, and we don't have shareholders to answer to, and so on. So we were able to make a very different kind of brave decision around wanting to do that, and we looked for the benefits from like reduced number of complaints because we were giving people the right level of information, and also from recommendations because people were getting good service. And that is not a kind of normal managerial mindset in the UK, I have to say, and it wasn't within Nationwide either. Like lots of people had to be convinced that that was the right approach to take when we were going to start experimenting with this technology, rather than take the 40 seconds away. So I think I'm just going to say it's a good example because it's about organizations are going to create capacity by deploying this AI, and they'll need to make some decisions about what they want to do with that capacity at the point when they create it. And if what employees see is you taking that time away and banking all the investment, like everyone else in your organization will watch that and they'll see that happen and they'll go, well, look what happened when they gave them AI, they gave them twice as much work to do. So you really need to think really carefully about the deployment of AI in your organization, and actually like what does it help serve your purpose, which is why I mentioned that at the beginning, really.
Just interesting how much all of these comments are, is seeing AI as a kind of, as much as an efficiency as a health and well-being issue, and actually depending on where kind of responsibility for it sits across an exec team or a board, or because actually what design is really good at doing is also seeing multiple values. And if you just approach something with it's all about kind of the value that you start a process, right? So if you start it purely on an efficiency, we're going to time bank things and so on. Whereas in that example, you made the decision to actually use that time saved and almost keep it away from, not keep it back from the workers. That becomes like a health and well-being saving for you, because you're actually giving people that kind of that headspace. And so seeing those two things kind of side by side, I think is really important.
So just add to that, say in our work, we see a lot of use of algorithmic management, increasing use of that actually for workforces, which shapes their experience of work. When and how and sometimes where they work. And there are some worrying examples in sectors like logistics and retail and so on, but also some positive examples. In the NHS, for example, there is much more widespread use, to the point about health and well-being, of e-rostering to give people input and control into their shift patterns. And you can see some dramatic changes. There's one trust that we've worked with, which was using manual rostering, which took 25 hours per shift period, with 300 different options needing to be inputted from staff. And with the use of e-rostering technology, that time went down to 2 hours per roster, and 300,000 different options were possible. And that can make a massive difference to people's experience of their working week. And obviously we know all about the challenges in the NHS when it comes to burnout. And so there are really good potential applications of this technology alongside some of the more worrying ones that we often focus on.
I'm just going to pause before doing the next one and see if anybody who doesn't like Slido wants to ask a question from the audience. Everyone's very tech proficient, which is entirely appropriate here. And then reorder that. It's been done anyway for logic. How common is it? So digging a bit deeper into this space that we've now gone, how common is it that organisations are double running processes in order to pilot AI while they are also managing risk and learning at the same time? Is there any other way?
I don't know to say that is there any other way. I think there's some real value in actually double running the process, in our experience. Like that, to literally kind of give the AI to one team and not to another, and to do the effectively the control testing. But you need to be really wary when you're doing that the team that's got the technology doesn't end up getting all the benefit and reward off the back of it, which is something that I think a number of organisations aren't necessarily thinking too much about. So I don't know if that's really answering the question, but like I would say double running it is not necessarily a bad idea. You want to try and pilot it in an area and make sure that it works as effectively as you can, and then try and expand out that tool. And that's not necessarily a new thing for tech deployment. What's different in AI though is that it's you're using. I don't have to explain to everyone in the room, but it's obviously participative intelligence. So you're going to give everybody those tools on day one, and they're not going to just kind of continue to give an output A, an output B, and there you're done. Like tech deployment's over. You're deploying technology that like people are going to expand its use completely in a completely different way over the several weeks, months, years that they're going to operate it. So you have to keep going back in and checking in with the teams to actually see what they're learning, because people will be learning at different paces and so on as well. So I would say it's pretty important to double run the technology sometimes, actually, because it's not just about what happens on day one, it's about what happens a month later, 2 months later, 3 months later, and you start to see the unintended consequences of some of the deployment later on that you weren't anticipating. So like having all that learning and feedback loop into your organisation as you're deploying AI is really, really important.
Because another way of thinking about the question is it, to what extent is it okay to double run processes? to learn and manage risk and try things if you are organising it in a structured, safe work design environment. We're going to pause there and think about how.
Yeah.
Other.
I mean, that's, in my view, how you would do this is through kind of experimentation and learning. And I think having a structured process for learning where people are reflecting and sharing their knowledge with the wider team is really, really important, rather than just everyone going off and just doing it by themselves, feeling unsupported, not sharing the benefits of their wisdom, not being able to then kind of iterate and improve the technology as well. So I think it's absolutely essential.
And then that is quite a good point to ask the guidelines question. So with those things in mind, what existing guidelines exist, if any, that help an organisations decide whether and how they should be automating or not? What are you using? What do you suggest? Not for me.
Yeah, I have to say I don't know particularly on AI specific guidelines for different organisations. I mean, but I think, if anyone's interested in a kind of a participatory design approach, then you can come to our website. We've got tons of information about that.
I'm sure, I think the Institute for the Future of Work has produced a lot of guidance here, but it is, I think in this field it's emerging, so it is limited. But I'll make a slightly broader point, which I think is that there is often a lack of support for employers when it comes to work design. It is not something that is sort of understood as a discipline often. And I think that this is another learning from the work that we've done around job quality, for this debate, which is that often we, in this country in particular, we leave employers to sort of muddle along on their own. There is often a lack of institutional support. There's often, we work on the Employment Rights Act, for example, at the moment, which employers are grappling with, and there are lots of aspects of the legislation that they're looking to put into practice. We think that there's a lack of sectoral coordination, sectoral dialogue, and I think the same probably applies as more and more companies are thinking about AI adoption and innovation, how to do it well and how to do it in an ethical way. And often we forget also that 99.9% of companies in this country are SMEs who have very little capacity to be kind of engaging with these issues in a serious way. So I think there's a broader issue about institutional support for employers when it comes to various aspects of work design.
Thank you. And
because you mentioned ethics, it just reminded me of one thing, that the government has actually just updated its framework for the ethical use of AI. So it's been around since 2016 in various different forms, but it was just updated last year. And that again takes a design-led approach to how you might use AI in your organisation, public sector leading the way, but other organisations it's applicable. And it starts with purpose. So it's well worth a read, and it also considers things about kind of how your employers are using it, but also about sustainability and also kind of data collection as well, and equity.
Thank you. And we also now have our contribution to this, the 6 R's framework on responsible AI and good work design, available for use. So in thinking about this, not just guidelines, but what you need to know and do to implement them, where does information and informed communication sit in the process of design and successful AI adoption? How can we get more and better information and communicate better as we design?
Okay. So the real, I think, coming back to the point I was making earlier about trying to communicate to employees about what the impact of AI is likely to be while you're redesigning their jobs is a it's a complex area because there is so much going on in the external world. Even if we set out at Nationwide to run various workshops with teams on an AI implementation, and we would set it out with the best will in the world to be an open forum and have a discussion and so on, and then literally, another bank or someone else would announce that there's, exiting so many jobs because of whatever's piece of AI they're implementing that day, that morning. So it's very challenging to try and communicate when you've got all that external noise. I think that when you're in the middle of what would encourage people to do is think about this theme that we've heard this morning as well, which is around consultation. If you have if you're a unionized organization, bringing the union on side, we had a very supportive union who we have a partnership with, and I managed that relationship for a number of years, and I was very clear to bring them into all of our AI implementation discussions at a really early stage. So I think that kind of those sort of having those other partners around you to help with the communication while you're looking at job design, and then as you go to if you're actually going to have to change people's jobs as a consequence of implementing things, you're going to need to present that consultation to the unions anyway. So I think having those kind of consultation forums is probably a really important part of the job design, both in the design phase and then actually at the point when you're actually going to implement as well. I don't really know if that's answered the question. Sorry, it's kind of...
And now we're nearly at the end. So having had the first panel that made the case perhaps for people-centred approaches, and discussed in this one, answering the questions, some barriers and challenges and opportunities in terms of how we actually get that cracking in the context of AI adoption, what can I ask each of you, your take-home message for the audience about how we accelerate responsible and efficient AI adoption in the workplace?
I can go first. I mean, it's something that you said right at the beginning, but I really think it's like start with why. Start with what is the need, both of your team, but also of your organisation, and use that as the kind of the engagement method for why you're implementing AI, and get people to then take it and experiment, but around that core purpose.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I think the principles of consultation, of really good line management, of redesign, not retrofitting, are really the key ones for me. And learning from what we know about good job design from other fields. We're not starting with a completely blank sheet of paper here. There are strategies and approaches that can be drawn on. But I think also it's important that in this debate more broadly, we don't just leave it to employers, and that we do consult with unions and other workplace institutions to get this right.
I would say, in the rush for everybody to adopt this technology at pace, be the person in the room that says, remember to be human. And that shouldn't be such a brave thing to say, right? But it's really important there is somebody in the room, and there's enough diversity of thought in the room that somebody is saying that. And the reason why I call that out is not just that I was explaining to a taxi driver the other day about AI and so on, and then that was what he said to me at the end of the conversation. Was he just said, "Oh, I'm worried about this," but I said, if there's one thing you could say, what would you say? And he'd say, just remember to be human. And I felt like, we are rushing because there is a $1 trillion gamble on trying to push AI into our country and other countries at the moment, right? That's the reality. And organizations are feeling that pressure and trying to deploy technology at pace and accelerating things, and they are kind of losing their mind a little bit. So to be the person that's in the room, or have people in the room that are brave enough to say, can we just remember to be human? And remember that there are humans involved in this process, is the most important thing that probably anybody can do in this phase. It might stabilize in a bit, but right now, as kind of people, we're experimenting, and there's going to be a lot of impact on people's lives if we make a lot of kind of hurried, accelerated mistakes. So I would say, remember what the taxi driver said. Remember to be human, and that in the middle of any job design process that you're in, that's probably the call out. There's a person in the middle of this stuff, whether it's a customer or an employee, and we do need to be thinking about that. And I think some of the things that the guys have talked about here, in terms of the models that the Design Council have and so on, are really fundamental. That people are, it's human-centered stuff. So I'm preaching to the converted. I'm at a conference about human-centered approaches to AI.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for sharing your insights. Thank you for your thoughtful questions. Do read the report released today, and let's keep thinking about how work design and redesign can support transformation of work and working lives for good. Thank you.